There are moments in history when the world tilts, when centuries of certainty collapse in a single afternoon. For generations, the name Sparta had echoed like thunder across Greece. Its warriors were the measure of discipline, its reputation the language of fear. Every king, every soldier, every city knew one truth: no army could stand against the sons of Sparta. But on a sun-baked plain near the Boeotian town of Leuctra in 371 BC, that truth died. The unthinkable happened. Sparta was defeated, not by numbers, not by fortune, but by genius. This is the story of how one man, Epaminondas of Thebes, shattered 3 centuries of Spartan dominance with a single idea, an idea so daring and elegant that it rewrote the art of war for 1,000 years. For more than 200 years, Sparta stood as the unchallenged master of Greek warfare. Its warriors were thought to be invincible, their tactics copied by every other city-state. Even the whisper of a Spartan campaign was enough to make kingdoms tremble. They were the embodiment of order, precision, and courage, a living war machine. Yet on one summer day at Leuctra, everything that Sparta had built, every myth, every fear, came crashing down. In just a few hours, the most feared army on earth was broken by a tactic so deceptively simple that it seemed almost impossible. No new weapons, no divine miracle, no secret technology, just the mind of one man who dared to see war differently. To understand how extraordinary Leuctra truly was, we must first understand what Sparta was. It was not merely a city. It was an idea, a society engineered entirely for battle. From a moment a Spartan child drew his first breath, he belonged not to his parents, but to the state. The weak were cast aside. The strong were taken at the age of 7 and thrown into the agoge, a brutal system designed to strip away individuality and build perfect soldiers. For 13 years, these boys lived a life of calculated deprivation. They were starved to teach stealth, beaten to harden their will, and denied comfort to kill weakness. They slept beneath open skies, marched barefoot through freezing winters, and were taught that pain was a teacher, not a punishment. Every hardship carved discipline into their bones. But the agoge was not merely physical torture, it was psychological transformation. These boys were taught that they did not exist as individuals. Their worth lay entirely in the unity of the Phalanx. Glory, wealth, emotion, all were meaningless before the needs of the formation. At 20, if they survived, they became full soldiers. Even then, their lives remained bound to war. No professions, no trade, no family life until 30. Their purpose was simple: to fight and to die for Sparta. What emerged from this system was something the world had never seen: soldiers who fought as if they shared a single heartbeat. The Spartan phalanx was not just a formation, it was an organism. Each warrior's bronze shield covered half his own body and half his comrades'. Spears thrust in unison, shields locked seamlessly, and the thunder of synchronized footsteps made the earth tremble. To face them was to face inevitability. But Sparta's true power lay not in weapons or muscle, it was belief. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. From childhood, they were taught that death was preferable to dishonor, and to abandon formation was the ultimate shame. Their enemies stepped onto the battlefield already defeated, crushed by the knowledge that they were fighting men who would not break. The phalanx became the living symbol of Spartan perfection, not an invention of their own, but something they refined until it became unstoppable. Imagine a moving wall of bronze and iron, ranks of spears bristling outward, shields interlocked, voices roaring in rhythm. The sound alone, that metallic rumble of shields and sandals, could shatter courage before the first blow was struck. And when contact came, it was not heroic swordplay. It was chaos, a storm of bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, where breath was scarce and movement limited. Men stabbed blindly under shields, crushed against each other, pushing in a test of will as much as strength. The Spartans excelled in this horror. Their training meant they did not falter. Their unity meant the line did not break. Battle after battle ended the same way. The enemy collapsed, panic spread, and Sparta stood victorious. For 3 centuries, this rhythm of triumph went unbroken. Sparta ruled Greece through fear and reputation. Yet, beneath the bronze and glory, cracks began to form. Their strict society left fewer true-born citizens to fight. Their blind faith in the Phalanx made them resistant to change. They filled their ranks with allies and mercenaries who lacked the Spartan spirit. Outwardly, they remained the gods of war, but inside, they were fading. And then came Thebes, a city of farmers, artisans, and thinkers, not warriors. But among them rose a man unlike any other, Epaminondas. He was not just a general, he was a philosopher in armor. Trained in music, mathematics, and rhetoric, he approached warfare as an art of logic rather than brute force. While others worshipped the Spartan phalanx, he studied it as a scientist dissects a specimen. He saw what others could not, that the phalanx's greatest strength, its rigid unity, was also its fatal flaw. If one point in that perfect wall could be broken, the entire machine would collapse. But how to break perfection? The Spartans spread their strength evenly across the line, making every part solid, unyielding. Epaminondas chose to think differently. If he could not match them everywhere, he would not fight them everywhere. Instead, he would create one point of absolute dominance, a wedge of strength so deep, so concentrated, that even the gods of war could not withstand it. Thus was born one of the most revolutionary ideas in military history, the oblique formation. While traditional phalanxes stood uniform in depth, Epaminondas tilted the balance. He thickened one wing, packed it with his finest men, the sacred band of Thebes, and angled his line so that the full weight of his army would smash into a single point of the Spartan front. For centuries, Greek warfare had followed the same sacred pattern, 2 armies meeting face to face in perfect symmetry. Each side mirrored the other, their lines balanced in strength, depth, and courage. It was a dance of order and honor, where the outcome was decided by endurance rather than imagination. Generals across Greece had trusted this formula since time immemorial, believing that symmetry ensured fairness and stability in war. But one man saw the flaw in that beauty. Epaminondas, the Theban general, understood that symmetry might look noble, but it was also predictable. It chained war to routine. He realized that victory did not belong to those who were evenly matched, but to those who could bring overwhelming strength to the place where it mattered most. And so, he made a decision that would forever divide the history of warfare into before and after Leuctra. Instead of spreading his men evenly across the plain, Epaminondas broke with tradition. He gathered the heart of his army, thousands of soldiers, into a single, colossal column 50 ranks deep, anchored on his left wing. It was a sight no Greek commander had ever dared to create. Across the field, the Spartans formed their usual perfect symmetry, unaware that they were about to face the most dangerous idea ever put into motion. The Theban left wing, heavy and dense, faced directly opposite the Spartan right, where their king, Cleombrotus, stood with his elite warriors, the very soul of Sparta's pride. The Theban center and right were deliberately weakened. Their orders were simple: advance slowly, hold formation, and buy time. Everything depended on one decisive blow, the crushing power of the left wing. At the spear point of this formation stood the sacred band of Thebes, 300 hand-picked warriors bound by an unbreakable code of loyalty and love. Each pair fought side by side, not merely as comrades, but as soul-bound brothers. Epaminondas placed them at the head of the great column, where the clash would be fiercest. Their task was monumental: to meet the Spartan elite head-on, to look into the eyes of men the world believed unbeatable and not blink. Yet the true genius of Epaminondas was not tactical alone, it was psychological. He knew the Spartans had been invincible for so long that their enemies fought them already defeated in spirit. To conquer Sparta, he first had to conquer fear. For weeks before the battle, Epaminondas drilled his soldiers without mercy. He rehearsed the new oblique formation until every man could move as part of a living machine. He explained the plan in detail, no mystery, no blind faith. He spoke not as a distant general, but as a teacher, reasoning with his men like a philosopher, convincing his students that destiny could be rewritten through discipline and courage. He reminded them that the Spartans were not gods. They were men, flesh and blood, bound by the same fatigue, fear, and mortality as anyone else. Slowly, confidence replaced dread. The Theban army that gathered on the plain of Leuctra was not vast, but it was united by something rarer than numbers: belief. The year was 371 BC. The uneasy peace between Sparta and Thebes had crumbled into open hostility. King Cleombrotus, I marched north with an army drawn from the Peloponnesian League, Spartan citizens, allied contingents, and mercenaries. For them, this campaign was routine. They had defeated Thebes many times before. Why should this be different? Their plan was as it had always been: march into Boeotia, meet the enemy on open ground, and crush them with the might of the Spartan Phalanx, the same formation that had never failed them. But across the plain, Epaminondas stood waiting. To him, this was not another campaign. It was the moment Greece would remember for centuries, the day when reason and courage would face tradition and fear. The battlefield stretched wide under a hot, unmoving sky. The air shimmered with heat and tension. On one side, the gleam of Spartan bronze shone in perfect symmetry. On the other, the Theban ranks loomed thick on the left and thin to the right. To Spartan eyes, it looked almost absurd, an unbalanced line, a mistake. Some laughed, others shook their heads. None of them realized they were looking at the birth of a new kind of warfare. The horn sounded. The two armies began to move. Dust rose like smoke across the Boeotian plain. Epaminondas gave the signal. His weakened center and right advanced slowly, deliberately avoiding close combat. But on the left, the great column of 50 ranks, the Theban line, surged forward like a rolling tide. The sacred band met the Spartan elite with a thunderous crash of bronze on bronze. The sound was like the earth breaking. For the first time in generations, the Spartans found themselves facing men who neither broke nor faltered. Theban shields locked tight, their spears drove forward, and behind them, row after row pressed on, adding weight upon weight. Every heartbeat added another layer of pressure. The Spartan formation, built for balance, not for shock, began to strain. Their famous discipline held for a moment, but physics does not yield to pride. 50 ranks of men pressing forward against 10 could not be held forever. Slowly, the immovable began to move. The Spartans, the unyielding, were being pushed back. And then, amidst the chaos, the unthinkable happened. King Cleombrotus, fighting in the front ranks with the valor expected of a Spartan king, was struck down. His death sent a ripple of horror through the line. For centuries, the Spartans had been taught that they would die before retreating, and now, their king lay dead before their eyes. The line wavered, then buckled. The pressure of the Theban advance tore through the Spartan right like a hammer through glass. The impossible became reality. The Spartan phalanx, the very symbol of their invincibility, collapsed. The unbroken wall of bronze broke apart as men turned and fled. What began as a retreat dissolved into chaos, panic spreading like wildfire. The field that had so often witnessed Spartan triumph was now littered with their fallen. Over 1,000 Spartans lay dead, including 400 full citizens, a devastating number for a society that prized its warrior caste above all else. The cost was not just in lives, but in legacy. The myth of Spartan invincibility had died on the plain of Leuctra. As the dust settled, the world changed. Thebes, once an afterthought among Greek powers, stood supreme. Cities that had once bowed to Sparta now rose in rebellion. The iron grip that had ruled Greece for generations was broken. But the true victory of Leuctra was not just Theban, it was intellectual. Epaminondas had done what no one before him had dared. He had used thought as a weapon sharper than steel. His principle, to focus overwhelming force at a single, decisive point, became one of the cornerstones of military strategy for millennia. From Alexander the Great, who carried this logic into Asia, to Hannibal at Cannae, who perfected the art of encirclement. From Julius Caesar to Napoleon to the generals of the 20th century, all owed something to that blazing summer day in Boeotia. The Battle of Leuctra was more than a clash of armies. It was the triumph of intellect over habit, courage over fear, and imagination over dogma. It marked the moment when war itself evolved, when one man's vision proved that even the most unbreakable empire could fall to the power of an idea. The dust of Leuctra had barely settled before Epaminondas looked beyond victory. To him, the defeat of Sparta on that Boeotian plain was not an ending, but a beginning, the first step toward reshaping the balance of the entire Greek world. He understood what few conquerors ever do, that to destroy an empire, one must not merely defeat its armies, but dismantle the very foundations upon which its power stands. So he did not stop at Leuctra. With quiet determination, he marched his armies south into the heart of enemy lands. His goal was not vengeance. It was transformation. For centuries, Sparta's greatness had been built upon the suffering of others, and nowhere was this more true than in Messenia, a fertile region whose people had been enslaved for over 300 years. The Spartans called them helots, and their forced labor sustained the Spartan state, freeing its citizens from work so they could dedicate their lives to war. Epaminondas understood that as long as Messenia remained enslaved, Sparta would always recover. So he struck where no sword had ever dared, not against men, but against the system itself. Marching deep into Spartan territory, Epaminondas gathered allies and liberated the Messenian people. On the slopes of Mount Ithome, he founded a new city, Messenia, complete with walls so strong that even Spartan courage could not breach them. For the first time in generations, the Messenians were free. The consequences were catastrophic for Sparta. Deprived of their enslaved labors, Spartan citizens were forced to till their own soil, an unthinkable humiliation for a society that had once prided itself on living only for war. As their hands turned to farming instead of spear drills, their strength began to fade. Training declined. Wealth diminished. The chain reaction was relentless. Weaker soldiers led to lost battles. Lost battles led to shrinking lands, and shrinking lands starved the Spartan system from within. Within a single generation, the once mighty empire that had dominated Greece for centuries found itself reduced to a shadow of its former self, unable even to defend its borders without foreign aid. The legend that had terrified the ancient world dissolved into memory. While Sparta declined, Thebes rose like a new sun over central Greece. For a brief, glittering decade, it was the heart of innovation, the home of military genius. Epaminondas continued to experiment with strategy and structure. He combined infantry and cavalry in coordinated movements, a rare and daring integration for the time. He explored flexible formations that allowed his troops to pivot mid-battle, adapting to enemy maneuvers with precision unseen in earlier Greek warfare. Scholars, soldiers, and envoys from across the Mediterranean traveled to watch his armies drill, eager to learn from the man who had humbled the gods of war. His name became synonymous with brilliance, and for a moment, Thebes stood as the intellectual and military capital of the Greek world. But Epaminondas' vision extended beyond tactics. The true revolution of Leuctra was not in how men fought, but in how they thought. He had proved that no power, no matter how ancient, no matter how sacred, was beyond challenge. In the wake of his triumph, the Greek world learned a truth it would never forget. Innovation is both the weapon of the bold and the doom of the complacent. The tactics that had destroyed Sparta soon spread across Greece, adopted by imitators who understood their brilliance, but not always their spirit. The same oblique formations that had stunned the world began to lose their mystery as other commanders learned to counter them. Epaminondas himself saw the cycle begin. Innovation breeds adaptation. Every advantage sows the seeds of its own decline. This rhythm, invention, imitation, decay, would echo through the ages of human conflict. And when Epaminondas fell at the Battle of Messenia in 362 BC, struck down while leading his men to yet another victory, Thebes lost more than its greatest general. It lost its soul. Without his vision, Theban power began to crumble as swiftly as Sparta's had before it. The city that had once shaped destiny found itself once again adrift in the storms of Greek politics. But the idea lived on. Among those who studied Epaminondas' methods was a young prince from the north, Philip of Macedon. As a youth, Philip had lived as a hostage in Thebes, where he witnessed firsthand the revolutionary tactics of the Theban armies. Years later, when he rose to power, he fused those lessons with his own innovations: longer spears, deeper formations, cavalry support, and unparalleled coordination. What Epaminondas had done in principle, Philip perfected in practice. His Macedonian phalanx was more flexible, more dynamic, and deadlier than anything Greece had ever seen. And when Philip's armies crushed Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra in 338 BC, the symmetry of history was almost poetic. The Thebans, who had once shattered the Spartan myth through innovation, now fell to a superior form of their own creation. It was the eternal cycle reborn, student surpassing master, progress consuming its parent. Among the young soldiers who fought at Leuctra was Philip's son, Alexander. He watched, he learned, and he remembered. Years later, when he marched east to conquer the Persian Empire, he carried the intellectual torch of Epaminondas in his heart. At Gaugamela, facing Darius III and the vast Persian host, Alexander employed the same principle that had triumphed at Leuctra centuries earlier: concentration of force at the decisive point. He massed his companion cavalry into a wedge and drove it through the Persian center like a spear through armor. The enemy's enormous numbers meant nothing. His focused strength shattered them utterly. In that instant, the spirit of Thebes rode again, though few realized it. The victory of Epaminondas had not died with him. It had simply evolved. The chain of inheritance continued. The Romans, inheritors of Greek thought, adapted the same idea to their own art of war. Their legions were more flexible than the phalanx, divided into cohorts that could move independently. But when the moment came to break the enemy, they reverted to the same timeless truth: concentrate your power. Their cuneus, a wedge-shaped assault formation, was nothing less than Epaminondas' oblique principle reborn in Roman steel. Against Carthage, Gaul, Parthia, against every enemy the empire faced, Rome triumphed not merely through discipline, but through the creative spark passed down from Thebes. And even when Rome fell, the lesson endured. Through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, from Charles Martel at Tours to William the Conqueror at Hastings, commanders continued to rediscover what Epaminondas had shown. That victory comes not from evenness, but from focus. Centuries later, Napoleon Bonaparte would refine it again, applying it on a continental scale. His central position strategy, striking at isolated enemies with concentrated might, was simply Leuctra reborn under cannon fire. Even the generals of the 20th century, from the tank commanders of World War II to the strategists of modern warfare, still follow the same pattern, whether they know it or not. The tools change, the battlefields evolve, but the law remains the same. At the decisive moment, one must strike with everything. Yet what made Epaminondas truly immortal was not only his tactical genius, but his understanding of the human spirit. He knew that no strategy could succeed without belief. Before Leuctra, he had given his men not just orders, but conviction, the unshakable faith that they could do what the world deemed impossible. That union of intellect and inspiration became the model for every great commander to follow, from Alexander's charisma, to Caesar's confidence, to Napoleon's fire. Epaminondas proved that leadership was more than command, it was communion. A great general does not merely move men across maps, he moves their hearts. The deeper message of Leuctra echoes far beyond the battlefield. Every power, no matter how mighty, will one day face a mind bold enough to defy it. Every system, however perfect, contains the flaw that innovation will one day exploit. Sparta fell to Thebes. Thebes fell to Macedon. Macedon yielded to Rome, and Rome itself, master of the world, eventually collapsed under the weight of its own inflexibility. The pattern has never ceased. In the modern age, trench warfare was obliterated by machine guns and tanks. Dogfights gave way to missiles. The battlefield extended into the skies, then into space, and now into cyberspace. Each age believes its dominance eternal, until someone, somewhere, dares to think differently. That was the true secret weapon of Leuctra. Not bronze, not iron, not muscle, but an idea. An idea born from courage, discipline, and imagination. The courage to question what everyone else accepted, the discipline to prepare for the unimaginable, and the imagination to see beyond the horizon of tradition. Epaminondas died young, but his shadow stretched across millennia. Without him, Sparta might have endured. Without his innovation, Macedon might never have risen. Without Macedon, Alexander's conquests, and the spread of Greek culture that would shape the Western world might never have happened. One man's insight altered the trajectory of civilization itself. His victory at Leuctra was not a mere triumph of Thebes over Sparta. It was the triumph of the mind over habit. And in that, his legacy is eternal. For wherever courage meets intelligence, wherever humanity dares to imagine a new way forward, the spirit of Epaminondas, the quiet general who toppled the unbreakable, still marches on.